The West built a weapon, called it Sanctions, said it would crush Russia. Then a real war broke out, and the weapon pointed inward. In October last year, the UK announced new sanctions, tough ones. A ban on diesel and jet fuel made from Russian crude oil, even if it was refined in another country, India, Turkey, anywhere. The loophole was supposed to close. But here's what actually happened. The US-Israel war on Iran started. The Strait of Hormuz closed. And more than half of Europe's jet fuel, the fuel that keeps planes flying, that keeps supply chains moving, that keeps the economy breathing, came through that strait. Jet fuel prices doubled. From $831 a ton in February to $838 by April. So what did the UK do? The same government that announced the strongest sanctions ever just watered them down. Quietly. No press conference, no announcement, just a phased implementation. Which means right now Russian crude oil, refined in India and Turkey, is still flowing into British ports. Legally. The Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air estimates $1.8 billion worth of oil products made from Russian crude have entered the UK through India and Turkey since the first ban in December 2022. That's not a leak, that's a pipeline. And now? The UK Trade Minister apologized in Parliament, called the rollout clumsy. The EU is not doing this. Germany, France, they're holding firm. Britain alone chose convenience over consistency. Ukraine's Sanctions Commissioner said it plainly. Temporary exemptions may still generate additional revenues for Russia's war machine. The money Britain is paying for this fuel flows back to Moscow, through India, through Turkey. Through the same loopholes the UK said it would close. India's position? Vindicated? For 3 years, the West criticized India for buying Russian oil, called it immoral, called it hypocritical. Now Britain is doing the exact same thing and calling it pragmatic. This isn't just a UK story, this is the entire sanctions architecture cracking. In Episode 6, we showed you how the dollar weapon works, how the US freezes assets, cuts off SWIFT, turns the financial system into a weapon. In Episode 2, we showed you the Strait of Hormuz, the choke point where 20% of the world's oil passes. Now you see what happens when the weapon and the choke point collide. The West sanctions Russian oil. Then a war closes the world's most critical oil corridor. And suddenly the same governments that built the sanctions are dismantling them from the inside. The weapon didn't fail because Russia was strong. It failed because the West was weak. Weak in the way that matters, dependent on a supply chain it cannot control. Here's what nobody is saying. The sanctions were never about morality. They were about leverage. And leverage only works if you can afford to hold it. Britain couldn't afford it. So the leverage evaporated. And the message to every country watching? Sanctions are conditional. They last only until they hurt the sender more than the target. Russia learned this. China learned this. India learned this years ago. The only people who didn't learn it are the ones who imposed them. If you've been watching this series, you now see the full picture. The dollar weapon, the choke point, the backfire. Subscribe because the next episode shows you what happens when the food runs out. The UK watered down its own sanctions, called it phasing, called it flexibility, called it pragmatic. But the word that matters is simpler. The word that matters is dependent. When you are dependent on a supply chain you cannot control, every weapon you build comes with an expiration date. And that date arrives the moment the weapon starts hurting you more than your enemy. Britain just proved it. The question is, who's next?